Good evening, everybody. Lopa is a former student of our school. She finished her studies in 1994. She is the author of 3 books and she has made a couple of documentaries on the lives of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. This evening she will speak to us about the mother's inner quest and how it brought her to Sri Aurobindo. Lopa.
Namaste everyone. Thank you for coming, and I feel greatly honored to sit in this Hall of Harmony, where I gave a talk when I was in knowledge, and here I am after more than 20 years giving a talk. So welcome to this talk. And today is the story of Mother's inner life, and she has recounted it herself, and I have collected her stories and I have put them together, and I hope I can be somewhat of a storyteller as she was, because she was a very good storyteller. So her life starts in 1878, but her inner journey started when she was very young. She was just 5 years old, and she started meditating. She had a special chair for herself, and she used to sit there and she used to think about the world and its problems, and imagine just a 5-year-old child. And while she used to meditate, she used to feel a consciousness above her head. She used to feel a light. And that was Meera, that is the child. And her father wanted to go to the circus because he was a very he was a man with full of energy, and he asked her that let's go to the circus. And this 5-year-old is telling her father, no, I have something more interesting to do, and that is to think about the problems of the world. Then as she grew up, she used to read history books, and something used to happen to her. So we know that history is someone's perspective. Someone has written it, and it's not necessarily the truth. So when Mother used to read history books, she used to see that the writing had become transparent, and she used to see a writing behind the writing, and sometimes she used to see pictures. And she told her brother, who was just 20 months older than her, she told him, what you're reading is not the truth. This is the truth. So she told him the story. And he said, how are you getting it? And she didn't know as a child. She thought everyone could see the truth as she was seeing. But slowly she realized that she was special. One reason was that her mother was a very practical woman. So she didn't believe in anything supernatural, and she didn't believe in seeing visions. And by the time Mother as a child was already seeing visions. So there was a period in Mother's life as a child that she used to wake up at night, not wake up as in she was sleepwalking, and she didn't have poetry in her. And she's a child, so not all children have poetry. But as a sleepwalker, she used to go to her desk, she used to get out her notepad, and she used to write lines of poetry. And she used to put it in her desk and close the desk and come back to sleep. So one day she forgot to close the desk, and her mother came to wake her up in the morning, and she saw that there was a poem there. And instead of praising her daughter and thinking she's really extraordinary, as a lot of us would think, so the mother took her to the doctor. She said, there's something wrong with your mind, so you need to see the doctor. But the mother says that was actually helpful, so she realized that she should not disclose her inner life to everyone because people are not ready to receive it. And she also knew that she is special, that there is something more in her than the normal children of her age. But then she used to play with them, and she was a very fast runner. So one day what happened is, she was running and she came to the end of a road, and she didn't realize that the road ended and there was a big drop of about 3 meters, and below the 3 meters there was hard rock. Like she says, there are flint stones that were kept for maybe paving the road later. So she just flew into the air, and all her friends came running after her, and they thought she would really be hurt badly. But what happened is, it was like a slow motion after she flew into the air. So she felt two angels with wings slowly holding her down and holding her on either side and bringing her down and placing her on those stones. So by the time her friends came, she saw she was standing there, not a scratch, not even dust. So they didn't know because they were children, but she knew that something is happening. So a little background around that time, we are in 1880s and 1890s. So in those days, there wasn't, of course, a lot of books that get translated. Forget the internet, and communication was very slow. There were no aeroplanes. Letters came by ships. So she didn't have an opportunity to know about Eastern mysticism. But she tried. And what she got was spiritualism. So spiritualism is not spirituality. So there was a movement, it started around 1840s and it went on till 1920s. So this movement of spiritualism was where a lot of people started exploring the dead, the world of the dead. So you may have heard of words like planchette and automatic writing and channeling. So what happened was there were a lot of wars in those periods, and a lot of people had lost their children or brothers or loved ones, and they wanted to communicate with these spirits. So some of these mediums said that we can communicate with these spirits, they'll talk to us, and through us they can send you messages of how they are or what they're feeling, and so it brought a lot of consolation to people. So that was the movement where she was. And there were big figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He wrote Sherlock Holmes, but he was really into this mediumship because he had lost a son in the war and his wife was a medium. So he really believed in this spiritualism or spiritism, as it is also sometimes called. And there were, of course, a lot of quacks in it because they used to do things like they used to dim the room, and there used to be this channel who used to say that now the table will be wrapped. Some spirit will come and wrap the table. So now in a dark room you can always wrap the table or even lift it up. They used to say, okay, now the table will levitate. And then they found out they used to have a pulley system under the table, and they used to just operate it with their legs, and the table used to levitate. So slowly this whole movement disintegrated because of these quacks. And so what happened is, because Mother and Sri Aurobindo, they were all living there, they are coming to age in that environment, they also did all these. So Sri Aurobindo did also planchette, he did automatic writing, and Mother also did these things. But still she wasn't just happy because it was very loose. There was no philosophy behind spiritualism. It was a practice and a lot of it was loose. So she was looking for something, and at that time she saw this newspaper or a review that came out. It was a monthly magazine and it was called the Review Cosmic. So she found that and she saw a lot of good writings. So that was something that she held on to. And then meanwhile she was having experiences all the time. So one of her experiences was that when she was just 13 years old, she used to dream. She used to actually get out of her body at night, and she used to go above her house, and she used to rise far above her house, and she saw that she used to wear a golden robe that spread very far, and there were people who had come, people from the city who were suffering and in pain, and they were all in their dream state, but they had also come out of their bodies, and they were just touching the hem of her dress, and they were feeling reconciled. So they were feeling good for it, and she was healing. So she did this for night after night. And then when she was 20 years old, she started even a bigger project. So this project it's again related to the dead. So she felt that when people die, they go through a passage which is full of trouble because they have to pass through a vital world, and it has a lot of demons. And the souls that travel through that world are really tormented. So what she did is she created a passage through that vital world where she kept her protection, and at the end they used to see the light. So that whole thing took her a long time to build, and night after night after night she worked on that. And much later, in our age, like 20 or 30 years back, doctors have started studying this phenomenon they call near-death experience. So they have been studying, and all their patients who have actually died, most of them are cardiac patients. So they die on the operation table and then they are revived. So they say that they go out of their body and then they pass through a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel they see a light. And most often they'll be, depending on their religion, they'll be either an angel or a being or an ancestral figure whom they loved, and that person will take them to an abode of light. So this thing that they experience is what Mother made. When she was 20 years old, she worked on it and she created it. So coming back to the Cosmic Review, so she found this Cosmic Review, and she found the persons who were running it. There was one person called Max Theon. So he was an occultist, and his wife, Alma Theon. So the two of them were running this magazine. So she found out about it, and it was called The Tradition, the Cosmic Movement. So a little background on Max Theon. So Max Theon was an occultist, but he sort of was shrouded in mystery, and he didn't tell about his past to most of the people. But people did some research and they found it's possible that he was a Polish Jew who gave up his Judaism, but he held on to the mystic aspect of Judaism, which is the Kabbalah. So he had his teachings from the Kabbalah, and in between he joined a mystery cult, which also dissolved. But in those days there were a lot of these mystery cults that was just called the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light or Luxor. And he was the grand master of that cult. And incidentally, there was the Theosophical Society, which also grew out of this movement of spiritualism. There were these two people, Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, and Henry Alcott. They were both in this brotherhood. And they pretty much left at the same time, and they went their own ways. And Max Theon found this woman in Britain. Her name was Alma Theon, after she married him. And she was an extraordinary woman, in the sense that she was firstly a channel, and she used to go into long trances, and she used to communicate with beings from other planes. So once they married and they formed a nice team, they came from Britain, they came to France, and that's where Mother met them, because she knew some friends of her brothers who knew these people. So she joined this group. But this couple, they wanted some seclusion to practice their occultism. So they roamed around, and then they found a place in Algeria, in southern Algeria, almost just north of the Sahara Desert. And there they found this little town called Tlemcen. In Tlemcen, they built their mansion, and they had a whole estate with a lot of gardens and all. And it so happens that spot they found is also a sacred spot. Like Pondicherry is a sacred spot, right? Because Agastya Muni and his wife Lopamudra had come here, and they had set up their ashram. And then Sri Aurobindo comes here. So it's not coincidental that Sri Aurobindo is here because he was escaping the British Raj and he found refuge in... So everything has its other dimension. So the other dimension is that this is a sacred spot, and Tlemcen was also a sacred spot. It was an Arabic country, but they had some of their saints, Arabic saints or Sufi saints, who were practicing there a long time back. And there were these dargahs for the Sufi saints. So Max and Alma Theon are there. And Mother needs something more concrete than just this magazine, because this magazine, first of all, is written in English and translated in French, and the translation was not good. So she went twice for a long period, from July to October. She went in, this is in 1906 and 1907. She goes to Tlemcen and she stays with this couple. And when she is with this couple, every day she says is like a miracle. She tells some of the stories, but she says there's so much to say and so much that we will not understand, because this is really deep occultism. So she goes there as a student and she sees this Alma Theon. Most of the time she's channeling from other beings and she's writing down what she hears from them, and then she translates those, and that's what comes out in this review Cosmic. So most people don't understand what it is. So this is the situation where mother gets in, and as soon as Alma Theon sees the mother first time, and she sees that the mother has, in her occult vision of course, not the physical vision, she sees that the mother has 12 pearls on her, as though she's wearing a crown of 12 pearls. And that's a symbol for someone who is really accomplished. And so Alma Theon recognizes her and she says, you are that. I mean, there's no word to describe it also. It's just that you are that, T capital. Like we say, in Sanskrit, Tat Twamasi. So she has realized that the mother is such an occultist, or already an accomplished being. And then her training goes on, and she says some stories from those early days. So Max Theon was a very powerful man. In fact, when the mother was, when she still didn't have access to the Cosmic Review, one of her recurring dreams was that she saw a sort of a being in her dreams who had a human form, and somebody had given her the Gita. So she had read the Gita and she knew that Krishna was a god and a revered figure for us in Hindus. So she called this person that she kept seeing in her dreams as Krishna. She called him Krishna, and she hoped to find this Krishna sometime in her life. So when Max Theon comes and she has to meet Max Theon the first time in France, she's really expecting to meet her Krishna. And then she sees him, and he is actually, she describes him like Sri Aurobindo, that he has long hair and he has beard and he's very good looking and a similar height as Sri Aurobindo. But the first second she sees him, she says, no, this is not my Krishna. He's a very powerful man, Max Theon, but he is not Krishna. And the other thing she heard, these are just 3 little things she knew about Indian philosophy, is that the book, the Gita, Krishna, and somebody had given her Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. So while she read Raja Yoga, she was practicing Raja Yoga and all its. And when she read the Gita also, she was actually practicing the Gita and she was experiencing what Krishna was saying in the Gita. And the third thing was that there was a man who had gone to India and he had traveled in the Himalayas and met a few sadhus. And he was a Westerner, so he came to Paris and he was giving a talk on his experiences in the Himalayas. And she said it was not a very interesting talk because he was just being very superficial about the sadhus and all. But suddenly he uttered the word Om. In his talk he said, a sadhu had come and the sadhu told me nothing but Om. So as soon as he uttered the word, she saw the room filled with light, a brilliant golden light. And she had no clue what it is. Then she paid attention, and again, while he talked, he said Om. And again the same thing happened. So she thought that everyone could see it, but then nobody could see, nobody found it extraordinary. So she just tucked it somewhere in her mind, saying that there is something called Om that I need to find out later. Anyway, so now we are in Tlemcen and she is studying. And so about Alma Theon, this lady was a channel, and she said to channel these beings she needed a lot of vital energy. So she used to never get out of her mansion. She was always in the house, and she was most of the time channeling and writing down, and she could hear Alma Theon talking to herself as though she is talking to a being. And once this lady told the mother that, look, I need so much energy and I don't get it from food, because food is not a very high quality energy. So watch what I do. So she went to her garden and there was a big grapefruit. So she takes that grapefruit and she lies down and she puts it on her chest and she holds that fruit and she tells the mother, come back after an hour. So the mother comes back after an hour and she sees that fruit has been squished like a pancake. And all the energy from the fruit has been absorbed by this lady. So she absorbed more than what we can absorb when we eat the fruit. So, and then another thing about this Alma Theon is she could materialize things. So mother used to go out for walks with Max Theon. And when she used to go out, she used to lock her room. But when she came back, she saw a wreath of flowers on her pillow. And she saw it again and again. Very often she saw that. And she knew the flower, they just grew outside her room. But who could enter? There was a big lock in her door. And then she let it pass, and one day Alma Theon asked her, so did you find the flowers? So that's how mother knew that it was she who was materializing the flowers. And then mother herself learned materialization and dematerialization in her training. So one day, just to have fun, what she did was, she knew that her friends back in Paris used to do seances. You know by now what the spiritualism seances are. They sit together and somebody becomes the medium and they try to invoke a spirit. So what mother did, she materialized herself in the room. So they suddenly saw her, but they knew she was like miles and miles away. And then she took, to prove that she was there, she took a piece of paper and she took a pen and she wrote something on it. And then she dematerialized. And then later on they gave her that paper and apparently she brought it to the ashram and she had kept it for some time to show that it's possible. And the other things, she learned a lot of things, including colors. As it is, she had this vision of seeing colors. So she, like we say aura, so she used to see aura, and the aura used to change. So when she used to meditate with somebody, depending on that person's consciousness and what he is thinking, she used to see swirls of color around him. And she could communicate with those colors, and she knew the person before he could talk or he needed to talk because she was seeing through him. She was seeing the colors. And another thing that she learned from Theon is that we have this body, and then we know that we have a subtle body that we are perhaps not aware of, but sometimes in our dreams we can slip into the subtle body. But there are 12 bodies of that order, and every body is more subtle than the previous body. And they taught her how to get out of the first body, the material body, and get into the subtle body, from the second body to the third, to the fourth, all the way to the 12th body. And the miracle of it is that each body is aware in its own sphere. So the physical body used to continue to do its thing, it could even talk, but actually the consciousness has slipped through all the 12 layers. So there's one example where she and Theon used to work at it together. So she is going out of her body one by one. So she's reached the 12th layer. And she says there's a thin cord, like a silver thread, that connects all the bodies. And if that cord is cut, then it means death. So she says sometimes when you say someone has just died in sleep without disease, that's the reason. Because they would have slipped out of their material body and gone into their perhaps subtle body or some of these bodies, and they lost the link and they just died. So once she did this, and all the way when she was in some plane, in a very high plane, then she saw there was a box and something scribbled on it. She didn't know what it was. So she didn't know that it was written in Sanskrit. She didn't know how to read Sanskrit. But Theon knew Sanskrit. He had read the Vedas, and he was a very accomplished philosopher also, who knew a lot of philosophies of different parts of the world. So Theon told her that describe what it is. So she describes, and it happens to be her name, Meera, in Sanskrit. So then Theon says, okay, then I cannot open it, you have to open it. So open that box and tell me what's there in it. And Theon knew that they had gone to a plane. I mean, she had gone to a plane where inside the box was the mantra of life. That is what we call the Sanjeevani. So if you have that, the power, the mantra, then you can bring someone back to life, someone who has died. And Theon wanted it. He hadn't reached that stage. So he told mother, get me that mantra, open it because it's in your name. And the mother suddenly realizes there that this power is not for him because Theon is a very powerful person, but he's not ready for Sanjeevani. So she says, I will not give it to you. And he was so angry that he made a movement of anger that cut that cord, that silver cord. And then he got really frightened because that meant that mother would perhaps never come back to her body. She would just pass on. And then he was desperately telling the mother, concentrate on your body, come back. And then they both tried for a long time, and then she came back to her body. And then she says that that's how dangerous it is to walk out and not be able to walk back in. So in France, she had a few disciples whom she taught how to get out of the first body and go into the subtle body. And then sometimes she saw that some of these disciples got really afraid because you lose contact with the body and you think you are dead and you start panicking and then you may just cut that cord. So by the time she came here, she didn't teach it to anyone. In fact, all her occult practices, she didn't teach anyone. So there is a place where she says it's important, it's very nice to have these powers, these occult powers, and you have a lot of experiences, but it is not the divine. So you don't really need it to reach the divine. So by the time she was here, she had changed her plans and she didn't teach it to anyone. So all we have is her stories. But there was a sadhu in Rameshwaram. He was a tantric sadhu who knew a lot of occultism. So she sent some people from the ashram, actually not some, just 3, who were ready. She sent them to learn from him, but she herself didn't teach. And then about the power of Theon, just to give you an example. So one day it was raining and there were a lot of lightnings. So Theon decides to go up to the terrace at that time and he tells the mother, come with me. And she says it's dangerous because the lightning may strike you. And then he says, don't worry, just come with me. And they go up in the terrace and this Theon stands with his hands outstretched and he chants some incantations. And then she sees that a lightning is coming towards them and then he waves his hand and it strikes a tree. So she says, did you do that? And he laughs and he said, yes, I did that. So he had the power to play with heavenly elements like the lightning. And he had taught the mother a lot of tricks. So once, after her second trip to Tlemcen, she and Theon were returning together back to France. And of course, in those days, there were steamboats, steamships. So when they were crossing the Mediterranean, it started raining and then there was a storm. And the ship was tossing. So Theon and the mother go to the captain and they ask that, is it dangerous? And the captain says, it is so dangerous that we may not live. This is so bad. So and then Theon looks at the mother and says, go stop it. So the captain is looking at them and say, what language are they speaking? He's really amused. But mother knows what he's saying. So she goes to her cabin and she lies down. She gets out of her body. And she goes into the sea and she sees a lot of these beings without forms who are having fun. So they're playing this sort of mischief on people. And a lot of beings exist that are not good beings. But she cajoles with them and she pleads with them and she says, these are just innocent people, you should not do this. And after half an hour, finally the storm abates. And then she comes back to her body and when she gets out, she sees everything is fine, people are making merry and nobody knows what's happening. So this was true everywhere she went. Like we see people and we see what they do, but she used to always see forces. And she knew how to manipulate the weather, especially the weather she knew very well. So often when there was a bad rain and it was the 2nd December program, Like last year, I hear there was such a rain that the program had to be postponed, and the sports ground was all flooded. So apparently in mother's time also it used to happen. But she used to go to the sports ground and it used to not rain because she had total control over the elements. Okay, so one more story from her days in Tlemcen is that this lady Alma Theon, she used to practice telekinesis. So telekinesis is without touching an object, you make it move by just the power of your thought. So they had a huge table, and once Alma Theon was sitting on one side and an Arab had come to ask her questions about her practice, and he was not really convinced, and he was being a skeptic and bothering her with his questions. So to play a little trick on him, what she did is, without touching the table, she made this table rise, and it was a huge table. It was a rectangular table, from one end to another, very heavy. So she made it rise, and then it ran towards him, or it chased him. And this man was so scared, he just ran out of there. And the local people in that area knew Theon and his wife as the magicians. So they kept the distance because they were not sure how they are going to interact. But they were not alone. There were a lot of students who used to come to learn. Just like Mother, there were other people who were interested. Most of them were from France. They used to come and stay months with Theon and learn from him. So now let's come to Sri Aurobindo's life. So around the same time that Mother is going to Tlemcen, that's 1906 and 1907. So Sri Aurobindo has returned from England, and he also is looking for a guide. So when he was in Baroda, a lot of friends told him that start pranayam. They didn't have gurus at that time in Baroda, but they taught him how to do pranayam. And Sri Aurobindo took it so seriously, he used to do 5 hours of pranayam every day. So 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening. And then he realized something. Firstly, no mosquitoes around him. So there were a lot of mosquitoes, but a sheath was formed around his body, a sheath of protection where mosquitoes could not penetrate. And he felt that it was like an electric current around his body. And then secondly, he saw that the skin was glowing. And then he started putting on some weight. He used to be skinny, so he started looking better. And then what was most remarkable about pranayam is that poetry started flowing. So previously he used to write, say, 200 lines in a month. So every day he used to diligently sit with a pen and paper and write 8 or 10 lines. But now after pranayam, he said the 200 lines used to flow through him. In 2 hours he had just written 200 lines of beautiful poetry. So that was the time when he did a lot of poetry. So 5 years he did that, and then he saw he's not making a progress. So he came to a block. He said that how long can I keep doing this? I need some help. And he was meanwhile having experiences, like he saw a Kali and he saw the divine in Kali, and then he saw he was hit by horse. Not by a horse, he was in a horse carriage that was hit and he was falling, but then suddenly he saw the divine coming out of him and protecting him. So he had these experiences, but nothing really concrete to put it all together in a philosophy and in a big sadhana, practice of sadhana. So what he wanted the yoga for was to liberate his country. So he wasn't really after realizing God or becoming God himself, but he was after power. So he first thing he saw was once his brother Barin had gone to the hills in the Vindhyas, and he got some sort of hill fever, which actually kills people. So Barin was really sick. That time a Naga sannyasin came, and in a glass of water he took a knife and he made just a cross in the water. And he told some mantras and he told Barin, drink it, tomorrow you'll be free of fever. And it really happened. So Sri Aurobindo thought, okay, that is power. I need what he has. So he asked the Naga sannyasin and he said, no, I don't have structured knowledge that I can give you. You should find somebody else. So he waited for some more time, and in those days he used to be very busy because he had given up his life in Baroda as a lecturer and professor, and he had gone and joined the revolutionary movement in Calcutta. And he was giving lectures all over the country. So his brother again found a yogi whose name is Vishnu Bhaskar Lele. And he called the yogi and he said, "Can you help my brother?" And the yogi was good enough to come to Bombay at that time, or Baroda, wherever Sri Aurobindo was giving a lecture, and he told him that you want some help, but you have to quit your lectures for a while. So he said, "I cannot quit for a while, but I can give you 7 days. So in 7 days, what Sri Aurobindo did was he stayed in this room with Lele. In 3 days, he had emptied his mind. And so Lele was also wishing that he gets to hear voices and some guidance, but he went the Advaita way, which even Lele wasn't prepared for. So after he had emptied his mind, he felt this infinite and this sort of the whole world was like a cinema, everything moving in it. And then he told Lele, "I have to give a talk, I have to give a lecture in this big conference. What am I supposed to do?" So Lele said that if you have to give a talk, then you just your mind is empty, but you can always pray to the divine and say that you speak through me. Then Sri Aurobindo said, "I don't even have the urge to pray to the divine, I am so empty." So then Lele said, "I will pray for you." And he did that. He prayed and he said, "Imagine your audience is Narayan and address them as Narayan and it's going to work out." And then his talk, instead of talking just politics, he was talking about nationalism, as in nationalism as the religion, and that you should bring God into your love for your country. And from then on, he said that the silence never left him, and he never really talked or did anything from his mind. He always did it from a region above his mind. So then again Lele came to him and Sri Aurobindo said, "Now I'm going to Calcutta, but you can't come to Calcutta. What am I supposed to do?" So Lele was giving him instructions to continue his sadhana. And in between Sri Aurobindo said, "I have gotten a mantra from within." Then Lele stopped and said, "So that voice that is speaking to you, do you trust it?" He said, "Yes, I trust it." Then Lele said, "I have nothing more to give you. You have already done more than I can give you, and trust this voice and go on." And from then on he had no guru and he trusted this voice, and we know what this voice did to him. It was the Adesh that took him to Chandan Nagar, and from Chandan Nagar he came to Pondicherry, and also the same voice helped him when he was in the jail. In the jail in 1908 when he went to jail, he was really disturbed. He thought that the country needed him, so how is it that he's gone to jail? So he was questioning God, and the voice told him that you don't worry about the country, it's safe, it's in safe hands, and you need to do something for humanity. It's not enough that you do something for India alone, but the whole humanity needs something from you. Then he started his yoga and he had the Gita, and for 2 weeks Vivekananda had passed away in 1902. But for 2 weeks, Vivekananda's being had come and he was giving instructions to Sri Aurobindo. And then we know the whole story, how in a year's time, Chittaranjan Das comes and he's freed from jail. And then from the jail, he comes to Pondicherry. And when he comes to Pondicherry, he has this voice, or the master of yoga, as he calls this voice, gives him this whole program of sadhana, that he calls the 7 quartets or Sapta Chatushtaya. So this program has 7 baskets of 4 tasks. Put it very blandly, that's what it is. But each of these it's a big step in the sadhana. For example, the Ashta Siddhi that we have in our traditional yoga, those 8 siddhis just fall in one of those 28. So he's practicing these, and while he's practicing these, he's putting them in his diary. So by then he has started a diary, and the diary is of course the record of yoga that was published about 10 years back. it's available now, and this diary has a lot of sounds in Sanskrit, seed sounds, but everything is explained. So you have Sri Aurobindo's language. In Sri Aurobindo's language itself, you have the summary of what these words mean and this whole program of Sapta Chatushtaya. So the record of yoga is available. And in the record, what we see is that Sri Aurobindo is like a scientist. He's noting down everything that, for example, he's saying that there is a crow there and I am influencing the crow with my power of willpower. So he tells that the crow doesn't want to fly to the left, but I am asking it to fly to the left. And then he is observing. And he sees the crow flies to the right, and then it hops to the left, and then it flies to the right, and then it hops to the left. So he sees, he observes everything, and then when finally Sri Aurobindo applies the full willpower, he sees the crow as though physically pushed to the left. And then he does that with ants. Whatever he sees around, he sees squirrels and ants, and they used to have a dog. He sees that the dog didn't like to have bread. So he puts his mental power and he makes the dog eat bread. And then suddenly the dog is eating only bread. And then he has these 4 people with him, 4 disciples who had come from Calcutta, and he is doing he's practicing his powers on them. So he wakes up Moni was one of the disciples, and then he says he put his prakamya on Moni to make tea. And then after 10 minutes it worked. So for 10 minutes he kept putting this, and then Moni made tea for him. So this was Sri Aurobindo's yoga, and he was ready for the mother at that time, and 1914 the mother was ready for him. So she had finished her occult practices and he had also done his practices. And then the meeting happens. So there also it so happens that mother meets a man who had also gone to Tlemcen for studying occultism. And his name is Paul Richard, and she marries him. And he is a French diplomat who comes to Pondicherry, because Pondicherry was a French territory at that time. And he has come to canvass for an election, not for himself, but for somebody else. And the first thing he does, after landing in Pondicherry, he asks people around and he says, I want to meet a yogi, because I know India is a country full of yogis. Give me one yogi. So, and then he's talked to the right person, because Sri Aurobindo had just landed in Pondicherry in 1910 at that time. And he was living secretly in a house. And it so happened that Paul Richard talked to one of Sri Aurobindo's disciples, local disciples, and the disciple whispers in his ears and says, you are very lucky, because a great yogi has just landed here. And then the interview is fixed, and Paul Richard goes to meet Sri Aurobindo, and they have a discussion. So it seems mother had sent the hexagram, which is it's the Sri Aurobindo symbol, the 2 triangles embracing each other. So that's the hexagram, and that existed. The symbol is a very ancient symbol. So it existed in Judaism, and it's called the Star of David. And from Judaism it came to Islam, and you see it's used in Islam. And the Star of David is also in the Theosophical Society. In their emblem they use it. And it was there in Hinduism. In Sri Chakra you have a whole series of these triangles. So now we know that this triangle means Shakti and Shiva. But in those days there were no books. Mother didn't have access to books. But she knew, she was from this, she knew about the Star of David. But nobody really knew the interpretation, the deep occult interpretation of this symbol. So apparently Paul Richard brought this symbol and showed it to Sri Aurobindo, and he gave an explanation that he took back to the mother, and mother was satisfied. So that was the first lesson for mother finding Sri Aurobindo. So he had passed the first lesson. And the second lesson, which was the harder one, was that she was looking for her Krishna. So he had to be the Krishna that she was looking for. So, but it took a long time, 4 years. Paul Richard goes back, they lose the election, and he goes back, and then again in 1914 there is an opportunity to come back to Pondicherry as a diplomat. So he brings the mother, and that's when she meets him on 29th of March. She has an interview with him. He lives in the guest house by now. And in that interview, she climbs up the stairs and she sees him, and she sees him in profile. And that's the exact image of Krishna that she used to see again and again in her dreams. And she sees him and she instantly knows that this is the person she has to work with. And Sri Aurobindo turns and looks at her, and he also instantly knows that this is the person he was waiting for. So Sri Aurobindo was waiting. So we see that after the mother has come and she has taught him what she learnt in Tlemcen from the Theons. They both had occult experiences, but the structure was different. So she teaches him what she learned from Theon, and we see that his language has changed at that point. Some of these terms that Theon used to use came into his writing, like the psychic being, for example. There was the word soul and Antaratman, Indian terms, but the word psychic being came from Theon. And that was one of the biggest contributions of Theon to the mother, that he told her that there is a spark of the divinity inside you. See, we just take it for granted after so many years, especially since we have grown up in the Hindu way. But think of Judaism, they had a God high above, he created the creation and then he went away, and then he's waiting for the judgment day where he will decide who will go to heaven and who will go to hell. And even the God of the Christians, that this God far away has sent his son. The son has suffered for the people and therefore the people are redeemed. But there is no intimacy with this God, and that he or she does not exist within you. And the fact that you can one day transform yourself and become like him is really revolutionary. So that first idea Theon gave to the mother. He said that there is a spark within you. And that really was revolutionary for her. So that's where the psychic being comes, and Sri Aurobindo gets those words. And then they move on together in this, in the yoga. And we know the rest of the story. It unfolds in Pondicherry. And how they make this creation, the overmental creation, and then they dissolve it. And then Krishna comes in Sri Aurobindo, overmental delight, and then mother starts the ashram, and the rest of the story is well known. So I wanted to read something from a book I have written that I was inspired to write it from reading the Record of Yoga, where Sri Aurobindo writes about his experiments. So I created some characters who are like Sri Aurobindo doing their experiments. So this character explains what Om is. So someone asks him that, tell me what Om is, and this is what he says. So you want to know what Om is? Let me see. When born, our first cry begins with A, and the last breath we utter ends in In between is the wonder and the questioning, and the despair and the growing. In between is the stumble and the fall, the walk and the run, the geometry of lines, the geometry of relationships, the geometry of doubt wrinkling the face, and the questioning. Why is this happening to me? Why am I here? And the forgetting. The duties taking over, the schooling, the earning, the pursuit, a love, the interbreeding with other lives, disentangling, re-entangling in other forms. And the knocking goes on, the knocking of the fledgling's beak against the eggshell. There is something beyond the shell, even beyond the grand eggshell, the universe. And then the crimes of ambition, the gilded chains, the savior swords, success with its lizard eyes watching our every move. The knocking resumes more urgently. Then the respite of forgetting, the gloating in glory, the bloating of the ego, death of a near one, moments of clarity, always a relative clarity, then return of the cycles. Then suddenly disease, that stark reminder, breeding helplessness, bringing humility, if we are lucky, otherwise bitterness. And again the refrain of questioning. What was the purpose? And my purpose? Was there a goal that I perchance missed? And the despondency that eats at the soul's roots. Have I cheated myself? And the world falls away instantly. The groping, the knocking. Is the shell giving way? A parting of clouds. The sun streaming in. And one day the last utterance. From the first to the last breath, all we did was utter a long Om. All our life is nothing but a single Om that the mighty sacrificer offers to the fire. And while he pours the oblation, he chants Om. Okay, thank you very much.